Okay, so let's just keep discussing Act 1. So where we left off, Nora had revealed to Christine the secret that she had gotten a loan behind her husband's back in order to save his life. And this is something that she kept a secret from her husband. And she explains why she kept it a secret from Torvald, from Helmer. When she says, "Good heavens, how could you ever imagine such a thing when he's so strict about such matters? Besides, Torvald is a man with a great deal of pride. It would be terribly embarrassing and humiliating for him if he thought he owed anything to me. It would spoil everything between us. This happy home of ours would never be the same again." So it really is something that could possibly ruin their relationship if Torvald ever found out that his wife had gotten a loan behind his back. Because he doesn't, he had that, he'd mentioned before that he didn't really believe that loans were a good idea, that it was sort of based on false and inhibited the happiness between them if they would have gotten a loan. But here she is going behind her husband's back, but for a good reason, right? So her intention was to save her husband's life, but she does so in a way that deceives him as well. So there's sort of a little bit of ethical gray area there. Did she do the right thing? And then you get a sense that Torvald or Helmer would be humiliated if he knew that his wife had gone behind his back and gotten a loan. And it's related to his gender identity. So his masculinity, his sense of pride, his reputation are on the lines. If this would be to come into public knowledge that his wife had done this. So you can sort of understand some of the gender constraints for men and women. For men, it seems very much like their reputation is important. For women, it seemed as if, maintaining this obedience to one's husband is important. So there is fault lines in terms of their gender identity and the stability of their marriage. And then we get more complications in this matter with the introduction of Krogstad. So it turns out that Nora has borrowed money from a man with a very bad reputation, Krogstad. And he has a very bad reputation amongst those in this town. And their friend, Dr. Rank, talks about Krogstad as this kind of nefarious or, corrupt kind of person, immoral person. So Rank calls Krogstad, he calls him, so a person called Krogstad, nobody you would know, he's rotten to the core. But even he began talking about having to live as though it were something terribly important. And then he's the kind of guy where he says, "Oh yes, he's got some kind of job down there." Krogstad does work at the bank with Nora's husband, with Helmer. He says, "I wonder if you've got people in your part of the country too who go around, rushing around, sniffing out cases of moral corruption and then installing the individuals concerned in nice, well-paid jobs where they can keep them under your observation. Sound, decent people have to be content to stay out in the cold." So Krogstad has a very bad reputation of being rotten to the core, of being involved in kind of illicit criminal behavior, and of being kind of almost like a loan shark, right? He's involved in giving loans, but then also maybe blackmailing people, having power over them, and manipulating people that way. So he's kind of got a bad reputation. And it's unbeknownst to anybody else, Nora has gotten herself involved with this character, Krogstad, by taking a loan from him. So it's going to be a more complicating factor in her happy life once Krogstad makes his presence known. So Krogstad is going to blackmail Nora into he's going to try to get a job at the bank or keep his job at the bank even though Helmer wants to fire him. So he's going to try to get Nora to convince her husband to keep him on staff at the bank because Krogstad says he wants to gain his reputation back, become a more legitimate person with a good reputation again, but he needs Nora's help to convince her husband to keep him employed. And he's going to use this check or this loan as a kind of way to blackmail Nora because she has committed forgery or fraud. So it turns out that she had to have a male person in her life guarantee the loan before she could get the money to help her husband. But her father was on his deathbed and she couldn't tell her husband because he would never have agreed to it. So she, thinking that it was going to be just a minor, never be brought up again, forged her father's signature on the loan, but forgot to check the dates. So now Krogstad has figured out that her father had died before the date on the check, thus making it seem as if the signature was forged. So he has this information over her. And it turns out that this was the same reason how Krogstad lost his reputation in the first place, that he had forged a signature. So there is a kind of weight, a burden on Nora at this point because she's indebted to Krogstad. She's trying to both pay off her debt and not have this crime become public because it's a case of fraud. She could lose her reputation. Her husband's reputation is at stake. Her whole life, her whole marriage could fall apart if this news became public. So she's been being manipulated by Krogstad, and she also wants to maintain this appearance of being very happy and pleasant to her husband. So the surface appearance has to be maintained. So she really becomes more and more kind of manic as the play goes on, as she's kind of torn between what's going on inside her mind and then how she has to present herself as this kind of happy housewife, when inside she's very stressed and unstable. So let's watch a short clip of Krogstad confronting Nora about the forged loan.
You want to speak to me?
Yes, I do.
Well, why today? It's not the first of the month yet.
No, it's Christmas Eve. What kind of Christmas you have, well, that's entirely up to you.
What is it you want? Today, I can't possibly get any more money.
Well, we won't talk about that just now. This is something else. You do have a moment, I assume?
Well, yes, I suppose so, but...
I was sitting in Olson's cafe and I saw your husband go down the street.
Yes?
With a lady.
Well?
Was that lady Mrs. Linder?
Yes.
Newly right in town?
Yes, today.
She's a good friend of yours?
Yes, but I don't really see why
I knew her myself, once.
I know.
Oh. So you know about that, do you? I thought as much. Well, I may as well come straight to the point. Is Mrs. Linder going to be employed at the bank?
How dare you cross-examine me, Mr. Krogstad? You're one of my husband's subordinates. But since you ask, I'll tell you, yes, Mrs. Linder is to have a job at the bank, and it was I who recommended her. So now you know.
So my conclusion was right.
Oh, well, one has a little bit of influence, I suppose. Just because one is a woman, and when one is in a subordinate position, Mr. Krogstad, one should be very, very careful not to offend people who,
Have influence?
Exactly.
Mrs. Helmer, would you be so kind as to use your influence on my behalf?
What does that mean?
Will you have the kindness to see that I keep my subordinate position at the bank?
What does that mean? Who's thinking of taking it away from you.
Oh, you needn't play the innocent with me. I can see that it wouldn't be very pleasant for this friend of yours to be exposed to contact with me. And now I know who I have to thank for being hounded out.
Oh, no, I assure you it's got nothing...
Yes, look, there's still time. I advise you to use your influence to prevent it.
But, Mr. Krogstad, I have no such influence at all.
Haven't you? I thought just now you said...
No, I didn't mean it like that. No, what makes you think I have any such influence with my husband?
I've known your husband since our student days. I don't suppose His Highness the Banker is any less susceptible than other husbands.
If you speak disrespectfully about my husband, I'll show you the door.
The lady's brave.
I'm not afraid of you any longer. After New Year, I'll soon be finished with the whole business.
Listen to me, Mrs. Homer. If it becomes necessary, I mean to fight to keep my modest position at the bank as if I were fighting for my life.
So it seems, yes.
It's not just the money. That matters least of all to me. It's something else. Well, I may as well out with it. I dare say you know, along with everyone else, that once, many years ago, I was guilty of an indiscretion.
I think I did hear something of the kind.
The matter never came to court. But immediately, every path seemed blocked to me. So I turned to the business you know about. Well, I had to do something. I dare say I've not been one of the worst. But now I've got to get out of it all. My sons are growing up. For their sake, I've got to regain as much respectability as possible. This job at the bank was like the first small step up the ladder for me. But now your husband wants to kick me down, back into the mud again.
For God's sake, Mr. Krogstad, I don't have any power at all.
Because you haven't the will to do so. I have the means to force you.
You won't tell my husband that I owe you money, surely.
Supposing I did?
If you did... This secret is my joy. And my pride. And if my husband got to know about it in such a horrible, clumsy way and got to know from you, you'll cause me the most terrible trouble.
Only trouble?
Well, do it then. It'll be the worse for you, because then my husband will see what a wicked person you really are, and then you certainly won't keep your job.
I asked you if that's all you're afraid of. Only a little domestic trouble.
And anyway, if my husband does find out about it, naturally he'll pay off what's owing straight away, and then we'll have nothing more to do with you.
Listen to me, Mrs. Helmer. I think I'd better put you more fully in the picture.
What do you mean?
When your husband was ill, you came to me to borrow 4,800 kroner.
Well, yes, I had no one else to turn
I
to.
promised to get you that money.
Yes, and you did.
I promised to get you that money under certain conditions. Now, at the time, you were so concerned about your husband's illness and so anxious to get the money to travel that I don't think you paid all attention to all the details of the conditions. So it would not be out of place for me to remind you. I promised to get you that money against an IOU, which I drew up.
And which I signed.
Quite so. But I added a few lines to the bottom of the page, naming your father as security. He was to sign them.
Was to? Well, he did sign.
I left the date blank. In other words, your father was to add this later when he signed the paper. Does the lady remember this?
Yes, I think I...
I then gave you the IOU to send to your father. Wasn't that so? Which, of course, you did, because only 5 or 6 days later you brought it back to me duly signed, and you received the money.
Yes, and I paid you regularly ever since,
Yes,
haven't I?
more or less, but let's get back to what we're talking about. It was a very difficult time for you then, Mrs. Hummer, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Your father was seriously ill.
He was dying.
Yes, and died soon afterwards.
Yes.
Tell me, Mrs. Hummer, do you happen to remember the day on which your father died? The exact date, I mean.
Yes, Papa died on the 29th of September.
Yes, that's right. I confirmed that for myself. So there's something strange here, which I simply can't explain.
What do you mean, something strange?
The strange thing is, Mrs. Helmer, that your father signed this document 3 days after his death.
I don't understand.
Well, your father died on the 29th of September. Look here. He dated his signature the 2nd of October. Isn't that strange? Can you explain that? It's also rather striking that the words 2nd of October in the year are not in your father's handwriting, but in a hand I seem to recognize. Well, perhaps that can be explained. Perhaps your father forgot to date his signature, and someone or other may have guessed it later. There's no harm in that. What matters is the signature. And that's genuine, isn't it, Mrs. Hummer? It really was your father who wrote his name here?
No, it wasn't. I signed Papa's name.
Mrs. Hummer, that is a very dangerous admission.
Why? You'll soon have all your money.
May I ask you a question? Why didn't you send this document to your father?
It was impossible. Papa was ill, as I told you. If I'd asked him for his signature, he'd have wanted to know what the money was for. And how could I tell him when he was so ill that my husband's life was in danger? It was impossible.
Well, surely it would then have been better for you to have cancelled the trip abroad.
No, it was impossible. The trip was to save my husband's life, as I told you. We couldn't not go.
But didn't it even occur to you that you were defrauding me?
I couldn't care about that in the least. I couldn't bear you. You were so cold the way you created all those difficulties, even when you knew how ill my husband was.
So it's evident from that scene how there is a kind of inequality in women's ability to control their own finances. And this whole situation has blown up in Nora's face based solely on the fact that she was not able to get a loan for herself. She had to have either her husband or her father's permission. If she had talked to her husband about the situation, maybe she could have sort of circumvented all this complication, but he seemed to not want to take a loan. Then he would have risked his life because they couldn't have gone to their restful retreat in Italy. Or if she had asked her father, told him about the situation, she felt like that was too much information for him, that he would have died or gotten sicker. So she felt like she had no choice but to forge the signature of her father on the loan in order to secure the money. And this is an example of fraud. So forging someone's signature would be fraudulent. But, had this situation been, or women's rights been recognized, she would have been seen as a capable person who had the ability to get money on her own without any permission. But just because of the fact that women were viewed as incapable, as irresponsible or unintelligent and childlike, she was placed in this very precarious position. And now her whole life, her reputation, her family, everything is falling or crumbling, or the possibility of it all falling apart is there. So this is sort of the complicating factor, the main conflict of her story arc. And we'll see how this all plays out in the following 2 acts. But for now, you should understand what Nora's secret was, what she's done behind her husband's back, and what is considered the criminal act that she is now held responsible for.